Imagine this. You are Francesco Nori, standing in the marble courtyard of the Medici Palace on a warm June evening in 1476. The invitation arrived 3 days ago, delivered by a servant in Medici livery, the wax seal bearing the 6 red balls of Florence's most powerful family. Your hands trembled as you broke that seal because you understood what others might not. This was not an honor. This was a summons. The heavy wooden doors creak open before you, and torchlight spills across ancient stone. Inside, you can hear laughter echoing through corridors lined with priceless art, smell roasted meats mixed with perfumes that cost more than your house. But your stomach churns with fear, not hunger. Because in Renaissance Florence, a Medici dinner invitation is the most dangerous piece of paper you can receive. You cannot refuse without declaring yourself an enemy of the most ruthless family in Italy. Yet accepting means entering a palace where every smile conceals calculation, every toast might contain poison, and survival depends on navigating invisible rules that change with Lorenzo's mood. What you are about to experience tonight will reveal why Medici dinners were whispered about in terror throughout Europe, why ambassadors wrote frantic letters home begging for recall rather than face another evening at this table, why the phrase "going to dine with the Medici" became Florentine code for walking into a trap you might not escape. Think Medici dinners were refined affairs where philosophers discussed Plato over wine and roasted peacock? Think again. You are about to discover that Renaissance Florence's most powerful family transformed dining into psychological warfare so sophisticated, so brutally calculated, that it makes modern political maneuvering look like children playing house. Behind the marble columns and artistic masterpieces, the Medici ran an operation of systematic intimidation where refusing the wrong wine could mean financial ruin by morning, where a misplaced word during dessert could trigger your arrest before the final course, and where the entertainment between meals included torture disguised as theater and prisoners forced to perform for their lives. This was not civilization. This was domination, served on silver plates worth more than most men would earn in a lifetime. The invitation system itself was a masterpiece of coercion that trapped Florence's elite in a web they could not escape. When Lorenzo de' Medici sent a dinner invitation in March 1469 to rival banker Filippo Strozzi, the message arrived on vellum so fine it seemed to glow, written in script so perfect it looked like art. The words were courteous, almost warm. The reality was ice cold. Francesco Guicciardini, the era's most perceptive observer, later wrote that Medici invitations were summons disguised as honors, traps wrapped in courtesy, where refusal marked you as an enemy, but acceptance placed you at their mercy. The palace guest ledgers, still preserved in Florentine archives, show arrival times recorded to the minute and seating arrangements that revealed your current standing in Lorenzo's favor. Arrive too early and you seemed desperate. Arrive late and you insulted the host. The psychological pressure began before you even crossed the threshold. The physical approach to the palace amplified your vulnerability with every step. You walked through the Via Larga, past workshops where artisans stop their labor to watch you pass, their eyes measuring whether you will emerge tomorrow morning. The palace facade looms above you, 3 stories of rusticated stone that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. The Medici built their home to resemble a fortress because that is exactly what it was. Guards in crimson and gold livery flanked the entrance, their hands resting on sword hilts. their faces blank as they assess whether you carry weapons. You do not, of course. Only a fool would bring a blade to a Medici dinner. The search that follows is thorough and humiliating. They check your clothing for concealed knives, inspect your boots for hidden compartments, even examine your rings for poison reservoirs. This is not paranoia. This is experience. Inside, the courtyard takes your breath away despite your fear. Columns rise toward a sky now deep purple with dusk. Torches cast dancing shadows across sculptures that cost more than entire villages. But beauty here serves power, not pleasure. Every statue, every fresco, every perfectly proportioned arch reminds you that the Medici command resources beyond your comprehension. You are led through corridors where servants glide past like ghosts, their eyes downcast, their movements practiced. They have learned not to see what happens in these halls. The dining chamber doors stand 15 feet tall, carved with scenes from classical mythology where gods devour mortals. The symbolism is not subtle. You are about to be consumed. The dining hall stretches before you like a cathedral to wealth and power. The ceiling soars 2 stories high, painted with celestial scenes where Medici ancestors mingle with saints and angels. The absurdity would be laughable if it were not so terrifying. Tapestries worth kingdoms hang on walls, depicting biblical scenes and classical battles. The table itself runs 30 feet long, carved from a single massive oak, polished until it reflects candlelight like dark water. Place settings gleam with silver so pure it seems to glow from within. Crystal goblets catch light and throw rainbows across white linen. Everything is perfect. Everything is calculated. Everything is designed to remind you of your insignificance. Lorenzo de' Medici sits at the head of the table, and you feel his eyes assess you the moment you enter. He is not physically imposing. His face is famously ugly, his nose broken and badly set, his skin marked by illness. But his gaze carries the weight of absolute power. This man controls Florence's banks, influences the Pope, manipulates kings. He can destroy you with a word or a gesture so subtle you might not even notice until the consequences arrive. You bow, deeper than strictly necessary, because survival sometimes requires surrendering dignity. He nods the smallest movement of his head and indicates your seat. The position tells you everything. You are placed in the middle of the table, neither honored nor disgraced, surrounded by other merchants and minor nobility who share your precarious status. This is the battlefield, where Florence's future is decided, where alliances form and dissolve between courses, where men gamble their lives on reading Lorenzo's mood correctly. But here is where the nightmare truly begins, where the sophisticated veneer cracks to reveal the horror underneath. The food arrives in a procession of servants carrying dishes that smell divine and might be deadly. Because at Medici dinners, poison is not a possibility. It is an expectation. Every course, every dish, every cup of wine passes through an elaborate detection system that exists because assassination attempts are common enough to require permanent procedures. 3 separate food tasters serve the Medici household, and their life expectancy is measured in months, not years. Court physician records from 1470 to 1492, preserved in the Medici archives, document 14 taster deaths, 9 of them during or immediately after dinner service. These were not accidents. These were murders interrupted. The first taster approaches your dish. A young man, perhaps 20 years old, with the hollowed look of someone who knows his profession, is a slow death sentence. He takes a small portion of the roasted duck on your plate, chews carefully, swallows, then waits. Everyone at the table pauses. Conversation stops. Lorenzo watches with the calm interest of a man observing a scientific experiment. 30 seconds pass. The taster remains standing. He takes a piece of bread from your plate, eats it, waits again. Another 30 seconds. Still standing. Finally, he samples your wine, holding the cup to the light first, checking for sediment or unusual color, then taking a full swallow. The wait this time stretches longer. Wine is the preferred delivery method for poison because it masks bitter tastes, and the alcohol accelerates absorption. The young man's face remains neutral, but you see sweat forming on his forehead. Whether from fear or early symptoms, you cannot tell. After a full minute, he bows and moves to the next guest. You are cleared to eat, but the taster system is only the first layer of protection, the most visible part of a security apparatus so extensive it transforms meals into military operations. Lucrezia Tornabuoni, Lorenzo's mother, described in a letter to her cousin the silver detection fork, a utensil made from a special alloy that supposedly changed color in the presence of certain poisons. These forks cost a fortune to produce and were wildly unreliable, but their presence at every place setting sent a clear message. The Medici take poison seriously because people seriously try to poison them. Archaeological analysis of Medici dining implements shows traces of antimony, arsenic, and mercury on multiple pieces, confirming that these fears were grounded in repeated attempts. The most chilling documentary evidence comes from a 1488 trial where a poisoner confessed under torture to 7 separate attempts on Medici family members during dinners. His testimony, recorded by court scribes in excruciating detail, reveals the sophistication of Renaissance assassination techniques. He described using delayed action poisons that would not manifest symptoms for hours, allowing the poisoner to be far away when death occurred. He detailed methods of coating only portions of shared dishes so that one diner would die while others remained unharmed. He explained how to bribe servants to poison wine after it had been tasted, but before it was served. The methods were so advanced, so carefully planned, that survival required not just caution, but paranoia elevated to an art form. In 1476, the year you are experiencing this dinner, an incident occurred that became legend in Florence. A rival banking family attempted to poison Cardinal Giovanni de' Medici, Lorenzo's brother, during a feast. The poison was detected not by the taster, but by pure chance. A dog begging for scraps was given a piece of meat from the cardinal's plate. The animal was dead within minutes, convulsing on the marble floor while dinner guests watched in horror. The servant who had delivered the dish was seized immediately. Under interrogation, he revealed the entire conspiracy. By dawn, 3 members of the rival family were hanging from windows of the Palazzo Vecchio, their bodies left as warnings. The cardinal, meanwhile, instituted even more extreme safety measures, including a personal food taster who accompanied him everywhere and a portable poison detection kit he carried in a leather case. The kit, still preserved in the Bargello Museum, contains vials of supposed antidotes, strips of treated paper for testing food, and small cages that once held mice used as living detectors. You have just witnessed how Medici dinners transformed food into weaponry, where survival required navigating poison detection rituals that killed the very people meant to protect you. If uncovering these calculated methods of Renaissance power fascinates your understanding of how wealth and violence intertwined, subscribing ensures you continue accessing these deep dives into history's most guarded secrets. Because what comes next reveals how dinner conversation itself became a form of execution. But first, the entertainment portion of the evening demonstrates that the Medici understanding of hospitality included spectacles that would horrify modern audiences and forever changed what you thought you knew about Renaissance civilization. The servants clear the first course, and you feel a shift in the room's energy. The entertainment is about to begin. But this is not music or poetry recitals. This is something far more disturbing. The massive doors at the far end of the hall swing open, and you hear sounds that make your blood freeze. Growling, snarling, the scrape of claws on stone. Two servants lead a full-grown lion into the dining hall, the beast muzzled but still terrifying, its muscles rippling under tawny fur as it resists the chains. Behind it, another team drags a bull, younger but still massive, its eyes rolling white with terror. The guests around you lean forward with anticipation. You want to look away but cannot. This is expected. This is normal. This is Medici hospitality. Giorgio Vasari, the Renaissance artist and chronicler, documented the lion and bull spectacle of 1459 in detail that makes the practice undeniable. Cosimo de' Medici, Lorenzo's grandfather, commissioned special reinforced floors in the dining hall specifically to support animal combat. The expense records survive, showing payments for entertainment animals, stage blood to make the spectacles more dramatic, and cleanup crews who worked through the night removing evidence before morning. These were not isolated incidents. They were regular features of important dinners, scheduled between courses like we might schedule a musical interlude. The chains are released. The lion and bull circle each other in the center of the hall, while 60 guests watch from the safety of the raised dining platform. The fight is brutal and one-sided. The lion, starved for days to ensure aggressive behavior, attacks with predatory efficiency. The bull attempts to defend itself, lowering its horns, but the big cat is too fast, too experienced. Blood spatters across marble floors. The bull's bellowing echoes off frescoed ceilings. Guests cheer and place bets on how long the bull will last. You sit frozen, your appetite gone, understanding that you are meant to enjoy this. Your reaction is being watched. Showing weakness or disgust marks you as unsuitable for the realities of power. You force yourself to watch, to nod appreciatively when the lion makes a particularly impressive move, to applaud when the bull finally collapses. This is the test. This is what separates those who can handle Medici business from those who cannot. But animal combat is merely the opening act. What comes next reveals the true depths of Medici cruelty, the willingness to use human suffering as dinner entertainment. The dying bull is dragged away, leaving a smeared trail of blood that servants immediately begin scrubbing. Then guards bring in prisoners, men in chains who have committed crimes against Medici interests or simply had the misfortune of being captured by Medici forces during one of Florence's endless territorial disputes. Tonight there are 4 prisoners, ranging from a boy who cannot be more than 15 to a grizzled soldier with scars covering his visible skin. They are forced to the center of the hall, given wooden practice swords, and told to fight each other for the entertainment of the guests. A guest's diary entry from 1473, discovered in a private collection in the 19th century, describes these forced performances with chilling casualness. The writer notes that prisoners fought with genuine desperation because the winners were promised reduced sentences or sometimes freedom, though these promises were rarely kept. The losers faced execution or worse. The diarist describes one prisoner who refused to fight, declaring he would not provide amusement for tyrants. The man was beaten by guards until he could barely stand, then thrown to dogs that had been starved for days. His screams, the diarist notes, were impressive in their duration and volume, before adding a complaint about the noise interfering with conversation during the cheese course. The boy with the wooden sword is crying, tears streaming down his face as he faces off against the scarred soldier. The older man seems to be trying to avoid hurting the youth, pulling his strikes, but the guards shout threats. Make it entertaining or you both die. The fight becomes real. The boy takes a savage blow to the head and goes down. The crowd groans in disappointment. Too quick, not enough blood. Lorenzo makes a gesture, a simple wave of his hand, and guards drag both prisoners away. Their fate is sealed. They failed to entertain. In Medici Florence, that failure is unforgivable. But the entertainment reaches its most disturbing when political prisoners are brought out. These are not common criminals or captured soldiers. These are men who once dined at this very table, who made the mistake of opposing Medici policy or supporting rival families. One prisoner tonight is someone you recognize, a merchant who argued too publicly against Lorenzo's tax policies. He is brought forward, still wearing the remnants of fine clothing now torn and filthy. He is forced to perform a humiliating dance while musicians play. The crowd laughs as he stumbles through steps he clearly does not know, his dignity stripped away before the same people who once treated him as an equal. Then comes the poetry. Lorenzo de' Medici fancies himself a poet, and he is actually talented, his verses admired throughout Italy. But talent does not protect you from his cruelty. The merchant is commanded to recite an impromptu sonnet praising the Medici family. The man tries. His voice shakes. The words come out wrong. He stammers, starts over, fails again. Lorenzo's face darkens. The room falls silent. Everyone knows what comes next. In 1471, another poet made a similar mistake during a Medici dinner. The man composed a sonnet that was technically correct, but lacked feeling, lacked sufficient worship of Medici greatness. Lorenzo had him tortured in front of the assembled guests, not to death, but enough to make the lesson clear. Art that does not serve power is worthless, and artists who fail Medici standards face consequences. The merchant tonight receives mercy of a sort. He is simply dragged away, not tortured in the dining hall itself. But everyone present understands that worse awaits him in the palace dungeons. The entertainment concludes. Servants bring the next course. Conversation resumes as though nothing unusual has occurred, because nothing unusual has occurred. This is normal. This is expected. This is how power maintains itself in Renaissance Florence. You pick up your fork with hands that want to shake, force yourself to take another bite of food that now tastes like ashes, and pray that you make it through the remaining courses without becoming tomorrow's entertainment. The meal continues, and now comes the most dangerous part of any Medici dinner: the conversation. Every word you speak is being recorded. Spies disguised as servants stand against the walls, memorizing dialogue that will be transcribed tonight and reviewed tomorrow morning by Lorenzo himself. Trial records from Florence's courts reveal that dinner conversations were routinely used as evidence of treason, conspiracy, and disloyalty. Men were arrested based on sentences spoken hours earlier over roasted meat and wine. The Medici spy network was so sophisticated, so thoroughly embedded in palace operations, that guests learned to speak in careful riddles or not speak at all. Lorenzo's personal notes, discovered in family archives in the 19th century, include pages of observations about dinner guests. Next to names are assessments of loyalty, notation of suspicious comments, and plans for how to exploit weaknesses revealed during conversation. One entry from 1477 reads, "Tommaso spoke too fondly of Venetian government systems, suggest financial pressure on his shipping interests." Another notes Marco questioned cost of new cathedral construction. Remind him tomorrow that his business depends on contracts we control. These were not social dinners. These were intelligence-gathering operations disguised as hospitality. The art of dangerous wit was perfected at Medici tables by Piero de' Medici, Lorenzo's father, who destroyed political enemies through conversation rather than violence. Piero would guide discussions toward topics where his targets felt confident, encourage them to speak freely, then twist their words into traps. A comment praising Republican values could be reinterpreted as criticism of Medici leadership. An observation about Florentine taxes could become evidence of conspiracy to avoid payment. Piero kept extensive notes on these conversations, building files on potential enemies that would be used months or years later when the time came to move against them. The 1478 Pazzi conspiracy, the most serious threat the Medici ever faced, was partially planned during dinners. Francesco de' Pazzi and his co-conspirators met in supposedly private dining rooms throughout Florence, discussing their plan to assassinate Lorenzo and Giuliano de' Medici during Mass at the cathedral. What they did not know was that Medici spies had infiltrated their servant staffs. Every conversation was reported. The Medici knew the conspiracy was forming, but allowed it to develop, gathering evidence and identifying all participants before striking. When the attack finally came on April 26, 1478, it caught the conspirators by surprise that the Medici were prepared. Giuliano died, stabbed 19 times, but Lorenzo survived. The revenge was swift and absolute. The Pazzi family was destroyed, their name forbidden in Florence, their businesses seized, their remaining members hunted down and executed in public. Verbal treason was taken seriously because Florence's government existed at the pleasure of Medici power. One dinner guest in 1475 made a joke about the Pope looking ridiculous in his ceremonial hat. The comment seemed harmless. The Pope was widely mocked for his vanity. But the Pope was also a Medici ally, and Lorenzo could not allow disrespect toward allies to pass unpunished. The man was arrested the next morning. His offense was recorded as insulting a spiritual leader during dinner at the Medici Palace. He spent 3 months in prison and emerged financially ruined, his business contacts severed, his reputation destroyed. The message was clear. Watch your words. Control your humor. Even jokes can be treason. You navigate the conversation carefully tonight, speaking only when directly addressed, keeping your answers brief and unremarkable. When asked your opinion on a recent Medici art commission, you praise it effusively. When questioned about your business dealings, you emphasize how they serve Florence's glory. When Lorenzo himself addresses you, asking what you think of the evening's entertainment, you force enthusiasm into your voice and declare it the finest spectacle you have witnessed. The lie tastes bitter, but survival requires sacrificing honesty. You see others making similar calculations, their faces arranged in masks of approval while their eyes reveal terror. This is the true entertainment tonight. Watching educated men debase themselves, watching powerful merchants grovel, watching Florence's elite prove their submission through every carefully chosen word. The conversation testing serves another purpose beyond simple intimidation. Lorenzo is genuinely trying to assess loyalty and gather information that might prove useful. He asks about your recent trip to Venice, and you realize the question is not casual curiosity. He wants to know what you saw, who you met, what Venetian merchants are saying about Florence. You provide carefully edited information, knowing that complete silence would seem suspicious, but full honesty would reveal too much. This is the dance everyone at this table performs, offering enough truth to seem cooperative while withholding anything that might be used against you later. The exhaustion of maintaining this performance for hours is as draining as physical labor. But the cruelest aspect of Medici dinners reveals itself in the way young girls are displayed, examined, and valued. The youngest guest at tonight's table is Caterina, 14 years old, daughter of a minor noble family. She sits rigidly straight, her face pale, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles are white. She is here for inspection. The practice of marriage negotiation dinners was standard among Italian nobility, but the Medici elevated it to particularly degrading levels. Girls from allied or potentially useful families were invited to dinners where they were evaluated like livestock being assessed for breeding potential. Marriage contract negotiations, preserved in notarial archives dating to 1469, reveal that dowry discussions explicitly referenced observations made during dinner. The notation reads, "Bride candidate displayed appropriate modesty and acceptable appearance during inspection dinner. Dowry set at 4,000 florins." Another contract from 1472 states bride candidates' conversation skills deemed insufficient. Dowry must increase to 6,000 florins to compensate for personality deficiencies. These were legal documents, enforceable contracts that reduced human beings to commodities valued by dinner performance. Clarice Orsini, Lorenzo's own wife, wrote a letter to her mother after her first Medici inspection dinner in 1469. She was 14 years old. The letter, preserved in the Medici family papers, describes her terror as older men discussed her appearance while she sat silently at the table. They commented on her teeth, examined during a forced smile. They evaluated her posture, making her stand and turn. They assessed her conversation by asking questions designed to reveal intelligence and temperament. The entire examination took place during dinner, between courses, while she tried to eat food that stuck in her throat. She wrote that she felt like a horse being sold at market, displayed and prodded while buyers determined her worth. And she was lucky. She was marrying into the most powerful family in Florence. Girls from lesser families faced similar examinations with far less certain outcomes. The young Caterina tonight undergoes the same evaluation. Older men lean close, speaking quietly to each other while studying her face. Someone asks her to smile. She does, fighting visible tears. Someone else asks about her education. She recites Latin phrases she has clearly memorized for this occasion. Her voice shakes but remains audible. An older woman, evaluating on behalf of a potential husband's family, engages her in conversation about household management. testing whether she understands the duties of a noble wife. Every answer is judged, every gesture measured. The girl's entire future depends on performing correctly at this dinner. The marriage market operated with brutal efficiency in Renaissance Florence. Political alliances required marriage ties. Banking partnerships were sealed with wedding arrangements. Territory disputes were resolved through strategic matches. The young girls involved were pawns in games they did not understand, their lives determined by negotiations conducted over wine and roasted meat. Dowries were set based on the girl's appearance, family connections, and performance at inspection dinners. A girl who impressed could bring honor and financial advantage to her family. A girl who failed brought shame and reduced prospects. The practice extended beyond simple inspection. Some families staged elaborate displays during dinners to showcase their daughters. Girls were taught to sing, to play instruments, to recite poetry, all so they could perform for potential marriage partners and their families. These performances were excruciating for the girls involved, forced to demonstrate accomplishments while being evaluated like auction items. The pressure created psychological damage that persisted throughout their lives. Many noble women of the Renaissance wrote later about the trauma of inspection dinners, the humiliation of being displayed and assessed, the powerlessness of watching men determine their fates while they smiled and pretended gratitude. Tonight, Katerina's inspection concludes. The older woman nods to someone across the table. A deal has apparently been struck. The girl will be married, probably within weeks, to someone she has never met. Her wedding will be another Medici dinner, another performance where every gesture carries consequence. She will spend the rest of her life navigating the same treacherous social landscape you are experiencing tonight. This is her future. This is what she has been prepared for since childhood. The tragedy is that she probably feels relief that the inspection went well, that she performed adequately, that her family will benefit from the arrangement. She has been taught that this is honor. This is duty. This is what girls are for. The final course arrives as the evening stretches toward midnight. You have survived. You have avoided poison, navigated conversation traps, applauded horrible entertainment, and maintained the careful mask of submission that Medici dinners require. But you know that the real test comes tomorrow when Lorenzo reviews reports from his spies and decides whether you performed adequately. A single misinterpreted comment could bring financial ruin. A gesture read as disrespect could end your business prospects in Florence. The anxiety will not end when you leave this palace. It will follow you home, into sleep, into dreams where Lorenzo's face appears and you realize too late that you said something unforgivable during the fish course. As guests prepare to depart, Lorenzo rises. The room falls silent. He thanks everyone for attending, his words gracious and warm, as though this were a normal dinner among friends. He praises the food, the entertainment, the quality of conversation. The disconnect between his words and the reality you experienced is dizzying. But everyone applauds. Everyone smiles. Everyone thanks him for his magnificent hospitality. The performance continues until the very end. You bow deeply, murmur appropriate gratitude, and finally escape into the night air that feels like liberation, even though you know you remain in his power. Walking home through dark Florence streets, you pass the Palazzo Vecchio, where bodies still hang from windows, reminders of what happens to those who oppose Medici will. You pass the cathedral, where the Pazzi conspirators tried and failed to break Medici control. You pass shops and homes owned by families who have learned, as you have learned tonight, that survival in Florence means submission to the family that turned dining into warfare and hospitality into intimidation. The dinner is over, but its consequences have just begun. Tomorrow, Lorenzo will review the reports. Tomorrow, he will decide your value. Tomorrow, you will learn whether you passed the test or failed in ways you do not yet understand. You came into this believing Renaissance dinners were civilized affairs of art and philosophy, gatherings where humanist ideals flourished and culture was celebrated. Now you understand they were theaters of psychological warfare where teenage girls were traded like currency and one wrong word meant death, where poison was expected and entertainment meant torture, where every moment was a test and failure brought destruction. This transformation of understanding is exactly why these hidden histories matter. If this journey into the brutal machinery of Renaissance power has awakened your appetite for truth, subscribing means you will continue accessing these revelations that museum tours will not teach. These glimpses behind the marble and frescoes to see the blood and fear that built Florence. Your curiosity about how power really operated, how beauty masked cruelty, how civilization and savagery coexisted in the same rooms, deserves to be fed with the uncomfortable truths that make history real rather than romantic fantasy. The Medici Palace still stands in Florence, now a museum where tourists admire art and architecture without understanding what occurred in those dining halls. The table where you sat tonight was sold centuries ago, broken up and scattered. But the palazzo itself remains beautiful and terrible, a monument to power that knew no limits and hospitality that concealed horror. When you visit Florence today, walk past the palace on Via Larga. Look at those fortress walls. Imagine the lion roaring in the dining hall, the prisoners fighting for their lives, the young girls being evaluated like merchandise, the conversations being recorded by spies, the poison tasters dying between courses. Imagine Francesco Nori walking home after surviving his Medici dinner, knowing he would never be free of the fear that one night planted deep in his chest. That fear is the real legacy of Medici hospitality. The understanding that power transforms everything it touches, even something as basic as sharing a meal, into a weapon that cuts deeper than any blade.